Good morning and welcome to our special conference to mark the first anniversary of the passing of Pope Benedict XVI. We are live from Campo Santo Teutonico within the Vatican walls. This event will consist of a series of discussions on the life, work and spiritual legacy of Pope Benedict. Tackling such a vast, profound topics is no easy task, but we can count on the expertise of our panelists to pass on their substance and to make sure to introduce new reflections on how to make this heritage really fruitful for the future of the Church. Our first panel today will have a rather personal tone with the testimonies of two men who have in common having been students of the young Professor Ratzinger in the 1970s and to have worked alongside him throughout his pontificate. This is particularly true for Father Vincent Twomey, who is a former doctoral student of Joseph Ratzinger. So without further delay, I will yield the floor to him, and after that we'll hear the testimony of Father Federico Lombardi, President of the Ratzinger Foundation. Father Vincent Twomey is Professor Emeritus of Moral Theology at the Pontifical University of St. Patrick's College, Ireland. He is the author of several books, including two about Pope Benedict, Pope Benedict XVI, The Conscience of Our Age, and more recently, in 2022, The Dynamics of Liturgy, Joseph Ratzinger's Theology of Liturgy and Interpretation. Benedict XVI awarded him the Pro Ecclesia and Pontifice Medal for outstanding services rendered to the Church and to the Holy Father in 2011. Thank you very much, Father. The floor is yours.
Your Eminences, Excellency, Reverend Fathers, brothers and sisters, first of all, I'd like to say our gratitude, express my gratitude to the organizers for inviting me to speak at this wonderful occasion, commemorating the life and work of Joseph Ratzinger, Pope Benedict XVI. Now, the title I was given was The Enduring Contribution to Ecclesiastical Life, up to his election. And when I began to think about it, I said, how stupid to me to accept such an acceptance. How could you speak about such a rich life? So I had to reduce it somewhat. What endures in the Church? I was asked to talk about the enduring contribution to ecclesiastical life. What endures in the Church is whatever truth, goodness, and beauty we have embodied in our lives. And it does so above all in the memory of those friends, of our friends. In the case of Joseph Ratzinger, his friends were many, not least his former students. What endures for those who have been exceptionally gifted by God is whatever is good in the example they gave, whatever is beautiful in their artistic creativity, and whatever is true in their writings. Joseph Ratzinger, Pope Benedict XVI, will be mostly remembered for what is true in his writings, product of his lifelong search to grasp the truth that almost escapes our grasp. Benedict XVI will be remembered as one of the few great theologians to sit on the apostolic throne of St. Peter in Rome. He wrote some 130 books, 1,300 articles, on a vast spectrum of subjects. His prodigious scholarly output did not always get the attention it deserved while he lived. Today, his writings are being discovered by more and more young scholars all over the world, such as the members of his new Schülerkreis, young theologians who are often surprised by the clarity, profundity, and in truth, the elegance of his writings. Ratzinger's writings include not only material for the specialist. Many of his publications, radio talks, homilies, book-length interviews, occasional lectures were written for the general reader. As he said himself in 1966, no one will deny that one of the main tasks of theology in our day will be to step outside from behind the defensive walls of its own technical language in order to directly engage with the questions posed by actual people, end of quote. Ratzinger's ability to do this, to engage in sublime, often lyrical prose, replete with striking images, is best seen in the hundreds of homilies he preached throughout his priestly life, up to the very end. They will inspire future generations. It was in January 1971, almost 53 years ago next month, that I first encountered Professor Joseph Ratzinger. He interviewed me early one morning as a potential doctoral candidate in his home in Pentling outside Regensburg. Apart from the simplicity of his home, what struck me most was the way he listened to me. I was just a theological greenhorn who, of course, spoke as though he knew everything. Did I notice a twinkle in his eye? I think I did. But he listened. And that, for me, is one of the main characteristics of the man as a priest and as a scholar. He listened patiently, but not uncritically, to the opinions of others, intellectuals or otherwise, to the zeitgeist, to other cultures, ultimately to God. His answers, his attentive listening, also created an atmosphere of openness and frank discussion, parousia, in his seminars, direct doctoral colloquium, and above all in his Schülerkreis, which lasted right up to when he died. The only one of his writings I had read at the time when I was interviewed by him was the book that had been translated into English, even at that time, Introduction to Christianity. The book is a product of a series of public lectures to the University of Tübingen, which he delivered freely from scribbled notes. They were recorded on a tape recorder, one of these old spools, transcribed by one of his assistants, the rabbinical scholar Peter Kuhn, and given to him at the end of the series of lectures, at the end of the semester, to be noted, changed, a word or two changed, and the footnotes added. It's been translated into 22 languages, including Korean, Chinese, and Arabic. It is a presentation of the faith to a world shaped by the skepticism of modernity and by the doubts created by modern theology and exegesis. Introduction to Christianity has inspired the conversion of many researchers for the truth, like self-confessed atheists, agnostics, non-Catholic Christians. One such young convert, the young Canadian theologian Andrew Caitler, speaks for many others when he writes, I quote, "Joseph Ratzinger's Introduction to Christianity is the book that unlocks all his other publications. It also the book that unlocked the doors of the church for me personally, revealing the profound beauty therein." The Tübinger lectures reflect his attempt at the time to rescue the Second Vatican Council, on which he had a huge influence, which we'll have to leave aside, from its detractors, both liberal and traditionalist. Two central topics of his theology, our Lord and Saviour and eternal life, will be explored later in these next two sessions at our conference. What I want to explore are some lesser-known topics to illustrate the wide spectrum of theology Ratzinger covered. One such lesser-known contribution is his contribution to political theology and moral theology. And it has enormous implications for our future. In 1989, the then Cardinal Ratzinger confessed that up to the student revolts in 1968 in Tübingen, which he experienced firsthand, up to the student revolts, the relationship of the church to the world had remained on the periphery of his scholarly concerns. This changed in 1968, he said. The student revolts that year and subsequently involved in instrumentalization of theology. Indeed, they were fired by a religious passion of a new generation. End of quote. This basic concern marked Ratzinger's decades-long intellectual engagement with both the gradual secularization of politics in the West and the new sacralization of politics in Latin America, namely the attempt there to identify religion and politics. Under the influence of Latin Christianity, we know, modern pluralist democracy emerged in Western Europe and only in Western Europe, and it is rooted in the recognition that politics belong to the temporal order, as distinct but not separate from the spiritual order, to use the classical distinction. To be human, politics must be based on practical reason, that is, based on prudential judgment, rooted in an objective moral order. Today, ideology and utilitarianism have distorted prudential judgment, political judgment, while the objective moral order has been denied. Utilitarianism, proportionalism, consequentialism, ultimately subjectivism, emotionalism. But both judgment, political judgment, and the objective moral order are predicated, are both perversions rather, are predicated on the limitation of reason to a functional rationality, leading to what he famously termed in his homily before the conclave, the dictatorship of relativism. Now, Ratzinger grappled in many of his writings with the underlying issues to enable the Church to engage creatively in solving the crisis of civilization we are now living through. He contributed to the dialogue with Jürgen Habermas in Munich in 2004 on the pre-political moral foundations of a free state, free society, free politics, in the Catholic Academy in Munich, is a prime example, but not the only one. Joseph Cardinal Ratzinger was made an associate foreign member of the French Academy in 1962, in recognition of his contribution to politics and morals. I suspect it was also a recognition of his own public witness and moral courage, which he displayed all through his life. Ratzinger took the place of another dissident, the Soviet dissident Andrei Sakharov, nuclear physicist and Nobel laureate. At the same ceremony in Paris, the dramatist and dissident, the Czech dramatist and dissident Václav Havel was also inducted. Ratzinger was in the same mold as Sakharov and Havel. He was a dissident living in the soft totalitarianism of the West that Havel described as was but a convex mirror of the hard post-totalitarianism of the East. Ratzinger's thinking and politics reflected the thinking of both Sakharov and Havel. He too spoke the truth to the power of a mostly hostile Western media, and to the no less hostile mainstream theologians. But he always spoke gently, persuasively, and unhurriedly, depending not on his own words, but on the truth he was trying to articulate and which the Church embodies. Ratzinger's own contributions to political science, usually ignored, demonstrate the truth of Sakharov's pithy statement, I quote, that the closure of half the churches deals no lesser blow to a country than the closure of all scientific institutes would do. In other words, without God, society implodes. And that is the cantus firmus of all his writings on politics and morals. Now, one of the contributions he made to moral theology that will endure is his notion of the recovery of primordial conscience. That is, conscience understood as our sensorium of transcendence, to quote Eric Voegelin, our basic instinct to do what is good and to avoid evil. It's an instinct that one's culture and one's own personal decisions can smother but never cease, never erase. This Urgewissen, as the Germans put it, is distinct from but intrinsically related to conscientious decision-making. Primordial conscience arises from the fact, revealed by God himself, that we are created in his image and likeness. Much of the confusion in modern moral theology, and so in the Church at large, is found in a distorted notion of conscience as subjective conviction, with disastrous consequences both for the individual person's own growth and eternal salvation, and for society at large. And much of the confusion in modern moral theology is the result of a distorted notion of conscience as subjective preference. What the scholastics call Synderesis, Urgewissen in German, Ratzinger called anamnesis, a kind of echo of the memory of the true, the good, and the beautiful that is embodied in our being as creatures of God. It's also the anthropological basis for the Church's mission. The Church's teaching is intent on awakening the conscience of those who every nation searching for the ultimate truth that makes us free and transforms us into sons of God. The same notion of primordial conscience, it seems to me, is also the basis of Ratzinger's contributions to interreligious dialogue. His whole life as a theologian could be described as a search for whatever scintilla of truth can be found in world religions, in the wisdom traditions of mankind, as he put it, and in the great thinkers of every persuasion. He listened. But he also listened to the voices within theology, advocating a religious pluralism that naively saw all religions as equally leading to God, and so creating religious indifference and the end of the Church's missionary zeal for evangelization. Ratzinger responded to their seductive theories with a clear articulation of the uniqueness of God's self-revelation, Jesus Christ, the desired of the nations, as we sang in Advent, and the consequent uniqueness of his body, the one holy Catholic and Apostolic Church, which subsists in its fullness only in communion with the successor of Peter here in Rome. As Cardinal Prefect of the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith, he was well prepared for the preparation of the Declaration Dominus Jesus to mark the millennium in 2000. It was a controversial document that an eminent Lutheran colleague of mine in the States, who admired Ratzinger's grasp of Lutheranism, claimed that of all the important magisterial documents he promulgated and he helped to create as prefect, with long-term effects on the Church, and there were many, Dolum Vitae, instructions on liberation, the whole question of the instruction, the instruction on the ecclesial vocation of theologians, etc. The most significant is this one. It bears his hallmark. But the most enduring contribution Joseph Ratzinger made to the Church and her mission must surely be his many writings on the reform of the post-Vatican II liturgy. Above all, the liturgy of the Eucharist, the very source and summit of the Christian life, as the Council put it. He not only lectured on the subject throughout his career, but even as Cardinal Prefect, he devoted his holidays and his spare time to a summary and a development of his thought in the book, The Spirit of the Liturgy. In 2008, the Institute Benedict XVI was founded by the then Bishop of Regensburg, Cardinal Müller, to publish his 16 volumes, collected volumes. At the time, Pope Benedict, as we know, directed that the first volume be published should be that on liturgy, 740 pages. Central to his understanding of liturgy is that it can't be made by a committee. Its nature as ritual demands that as a living organization, it must unfold gradually within a living worshipping community. In time, what he called the extraordinary form of the Roman Rite, the traditional Latin Mass, and the Roman Missal, the ordinary form of Paul VI, will mutually influence each other in that development. If we and future generations heed his intent, his writings on liturgy will ensure that the liturgy's organic growth will resonate with all the cultures of the old churches of the Western world and the new churches of Africa and Asia, and yet retain its distinctive Catholic character as the divine worship of the universal church. May I finish by referring to my former teacher's understanding of the nature of the church, which will stand the test of time. Summed up in his farewell address to the cardinals when he stepped down from the See of Peter, the church is alive. She grows and is reawakened in souls who, like the Virgin Mary, welcome the word of God and conceive it through the action of the Holy Spirit. They offer to God their own flesh. It is precisely in their poverty and humility that they become capable of begetting Christ in the world today. Through the church, the mystery of the Incarnation lives on forever. Christ continues to walk through the epochs in all places. End of quote. In a word, my word, the church is in the final analysis not defined by the hierarchy, despite its being a sine qua non. It doesn't exist without hierarchy, but that by the presence of Christ in the hearts of souls. That reminder of the truth revealed by Christ is needed for us and for future generations to endure the turbulence of our times. Thank you for your patience.
Thank you very much, Father. Thank you for this. We will now yield the floor to Father Federico Lombardi. Father Federico Lombardi is a Jesuit priest, former director of the Holy See Press Office from 2006 until 2016, and currently president of the Foundation Joseph Ratzinger, the Vatican Foundation Joseph Ratzinger, Benedict XVI. He has known Pope Benedict for so many years in different contexts, situations, and he always has an original perspective on his life, work, and pontificate. So thank you very much, Father, for being here.
Thank you. Very kind. Well, I thank you to have invited me to this meeting. As I said before, I feel very at ease in an atmosphere of friendship and of presence of the spirit and person of Benedict with us. And in this sense, I am very happy that Pater Twomey has given you a so substantial intervention with many contents and well organized, because I will do a totally different thing with some points of witnesses of my experience and not so systematic, and but I offer to you what I have and what I have in the heart in this time. And I beg your pardon for my terrible English that is not very well exercised. In any case, the first thing I had to witness is that my first meeting with Benedict, with Joseph Ratzinger as theologian, was the reading of Introduction to Christianity. Many years ago, practically in the time it was published for the first time, because I was a student of theology in Germany at the time, and I read this book, and this is one of the most important books of my life. Yes, it remains for me a point of reference to see what is theology and reflection on our faiths in the world of today, in relation with the culture of today, without fear, but with enthusiasm, with joy, with a very positive experience, and a hope to have good message to say to our time. In this sense, I find that this was for me a chance for my life, because I at the time had could not think to be 40 years after the speaker or the director of the press office at the time of Benedict as Pope. And the reading of this book as I was young was for me the premise for an admiration, for a sympathy with Joseph Ratzinger that could continue during my entire life, bis today. And I remember at the time, as I was this young student of theology in Germany, I desired very, very strongly to listen to him, to see him personally, to hear his voice. And then I could receive a stipendium for a theological week for students in Salzburg during the summer, and I could go to hear the lesson, the lecture of Professor Ratzinger. There was a crowd of young students of theology at the time, and we were listening with a very, very profound attention in a total silence of the aula. We admired, we were fascinated by the quality of his speaking. Was splendor of veritatis, that is the synthesis between truth and beauty, also in his language and in his way of expressing himself about our faiths. In this sense, yes, this has put a direction in my life of admiration, and I was so happy as Pope John Paul II has appointed him as prefect of the doctrine of the faith, because I said, yes, this is really the man we need to orient the theology in the church in our time, also in this time in which there is so much confusion and discussion and criticism and so on, as it was after the council in the first time. And his balanced and positive perspective, his capacity to take what is good and to bring it to a superior synthesis was really what we needed, even if he was a man capable of a strong position, if this was needed for the good of the church, as we well know. Well, then I am happy to have known Ratzinger in my young years and to have him as guide for thinking and for believing in an intelligent way in the world of today. A second experience I had after I was appointed to the communication in the Vatican, and I met Ratzinger, not so much as prefect. I had follow obviously what he was doing as prefect of the congregation, but I did not have a personal relation with him at the time, and I had a personal relation after he was Pope. And I had to do with him as a communicator. I was responsible of communication. And then, as you know, it was obvious to compare John Paul II as communicator and Benedict as communicator. I said, yes, John Paul II was a communicator because he was able to interlocute with masses, with millions of people together. The style and the profundity of Benedict as communicator was different. The style was different. But he was also a very good communicator because he was clear, he was synthetic, he was thinking in a perfect order, and you can follow him and understand what he is saying, even if he goes into profundity. It was a characteristic for me what happened during the World Youth Days, in particular in the vigils, in the evening, when the Pope had a long speech and there were hundreds of thousands of young people listening. The style of John Paul II, as you remember, was to provoke a dialogue and to have reaction and the clutches and so on, cries from the young people. They were interlocuting and with him. The style of Benedict was totally different. He did not like to be interrupted. He decided to go on with his speech because there was a line, there was a reasoning, and it was not good to interrupt and to lose the line of the reasoning. But the young people have understood this very well. I remember as the attention of the young people also during the big visit in Köln or in other occasions was clear because they were really silent. If you have a long speech and the people are not attentive, you hear many rumors and so on. But the silence was total because they had understood that they had not to interrupt, but they had to follow. And they received a text and the content that they could retake and reflect also in the days after. It was a profound richness that he was giving them. In this sense, different style, but profundity, order, and content, richness of content. And his capacity of synthesis was remarkable, really remarkable. Short answers, but with a beginning and an end. You understood there was really a sense in what he was saying. I remember also during the famous trip in the flight during the trip abroad of the Pope, there were this conversation with the journalist, no? And this form that we found during the trip of Benedict was to propose him 3 or 4 questions that had to do clearly with the trip himself, the aim and the situation and so on. And he could give in 10 minutes, 10, 15 minutes maximum, a very rich content to understand what we were going to do and what the more important problem were and so on. As you know, the style of Francis is totally different with the long conversation at the end of the trip and so on. But in any case, I think that what Benedict did was to help really to understand the aim and the profound sense of every trip we were doing. We could take many other examples of the synthesis and clearness of Benedict. I remember, Monsignor Genswein remember well, an occasion at the eve of one of the trips to Germany, as he had to record a short intervention for the television, Wort zum Sonntag, a word for the Sunday. They had to be 3 minutes. The slot was 3 minutes exactly. And we went with the CTV, the Vatican Television Center, to Castel Gandolfo to record. And at the beginning, as he came, I said to him, Holy Father, if you have mistakes, this is not a problem, we can edit, or if you interrupt and begin again, there will be no problem, and so on and so on. He said only to me, please save me when I have to begin. And then I said, you have to begin. And he began to speak so clearly, without any uncertainty, perfectly. And then he stopped. I watched my watch, 2 minutes, 57 seconds. It was incredible, as he was able to do a clear speech, synthetic, saying many things. This is a gift that I have no more seen in anyone. This is wonderful. In this sense, I say, was a good communicator. With his style, was a wonderful communicator. Another thing that I have to do is the love for the truth, not only in the sense of the conceptual truth, the intellectual truth, to write well about problems and so on, but to live the truth, to be really always in the truth. This was for me the key of his service during the long story of the scandal of the sexual abuses, no? Because the fundamental problem for the church in the sexual abuses was cover up. One of the fundamental problems was cover up, was the lack of truth. And his attitude, so clear to say always what is true and never to try to give an image that is not real, not true of what we are and what the church was, for me, really the key of his historical service to the church to confront and to cope with this problem. I think he has given us the right way. Then we have to continue to develop. Francis had many other things to add to what Benedict had done. But the right way was taken. And why? Because he is a man of truth. Another little for me strong impression is readiness to listen. Professor Twomey has also already said how he was ready to listen to the students and to help them and so on. We have done in the last years, Monsignor Gensway knows very well this story, a particular experience of dialogue of Benedict with a famous Italian atheist, Odifreddi, who is a very unpleasant man because he's very aggressive always and discusses and so on. But he looks for the dialogue, and he was very interested to Benedict because Odifreddi is a mathematician, and Benedict had done some important observation about the mathematics as language that to understand the reality and then the origin of the possibility through mathematics to develop the science and govern the world, says us that is a common origin in the reason of the intelligence of the man, and in the reality that can be understood through the mathematics by the intelligence of the man. Odifreddi was very impressed by this observation and tried to be in contact with him. And in Italy, many persons does not like to speak with Odifreddi because I said he's very aggressive, and in particular in the church, no one desires to speak with Odifreddi. Benedict had received by Odifreddi an open letter about introduction to Christianity and so on. And as he renounced, as he was in Castel Gandolfo, and he began to have more time, the first thing he did was to answer to the letter of Odifreddi. He said to me this, at least in the first occasion I could speak with him after renunciation. This was for me a very, very strong impression. He was not looking for people to dialogue because it is a pleasure to dialogue, but he was ready also for discussion, for confrontation. The dialogue for him is not a joke, not something to give a good image that we are open and so on, but is really to confront the problem, to confront different positions. In this sense, for me, he is an example of dialogue in the best sense, and he is respected by the criticists like Odifreddi and other very hard Italian atheists, because he had this attitude of discussion in the truths. Well, then I think that I have to finish, as the organizer said to me, but we can maybe have other occasion to continue. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Father, for this very valuable testimony. It's extremely important for us to have this kind of memories to keep his memory alive. And so we'll have now a few minutes to discuss into more details what you've just said. And what I really like is that both of you used to be students of Pope Benedict, although you, Father Lombardi, it was just for a week, if I remember correctly, during a summer camp, right? But you both were students of him while he was a very young professor, but still very popular already. Would you have expected him to become who he became back then?
No. I remember the shock I got because previous to the election, I happened to be on Irish television quite a lot talking about the heritage of John Paul II. So I was invited into the studio in anticipation on the first day of the conclave. Second day, I said, no, it'll be a long time. So I went home. Then I got a phone call, white smoke, come into the studio. I said, who's been elected? We don't know. Halfway in between Maynooth, outside Dublin, and Dublin itself, I heard the news. Habemus Papam, cuius nomen est. Ja, so Ratzinger. Ich habe das überhaupt, er war so alt, 48, ja, wie konnte man so how could you actually elect such a man? If I might just go back to my own experience as a student, especially in the doctoral colloquium and above all in the Schülerkreis, yeah, he had one pedagogical principle, one principle of teaching, yeah? Allow the students discover the truth for themselves. So this created this wonderful atmosphere of openness, yeah? And in a colloquium once, a seminar in Regensburg with both postgraduate and graduate students, he would begin, introduce the topic, and then we'd all give it, a student would read a paper, then we would discuss it. And after this discussion, after 20 minutes, Professor Ratzinger would say, now, this is the mood of the discussion. He could synthesize immediately the essential points. But Herr Schmidt over there, this young man, in his first or second year of theology, he raised a question, an objection, that nobody bothered paying attention to. What he was saying was, Herr Schmidt would say, that's what I was trying to say. He knew precisely what he was trying to say, and this is an objection, and that we have to take up. Let's discuss that. And so after the hour and a half was over, finished the discussion, and there was no attempt to put everything together, to summarize anything. No, the discussion continued. So it was that wonderful sense for us as doctoral students. We were given the freedom then. We didn't study his theology. We studied whatever area it was, from the early fathers to the medieval theologians down to the writers like Kafka. Each one of us then could actually explore, and we knew we had that freedom, you know. We would report then every week what we were doing, one individual. And so we had a wonderful, extraordinary period of openness to the truth, discovering the truth, you know, and that continued after he was elected Archbishop.
That's beautiful. It was also in the context of the post-Vatican II, the Council, the Vatican II, and so, of course, the context was particular, and it looks like, from what you're saying, is that he was applying this hermeneutics of continuity to the everyday life, basically, like always in balance between progress and openness to the world, and not denying any openness to intellectuals, to anything, but always searching the truth in it.
It was always a search for the truth, you know, and these terms, you know, progressive, conservative, liberal, progressive, he never bothered with those, and they're not important. They are putting people into categories, you know. He never did. Everyone was individual, and the uniqueness of each person and their approach. Who he was, atheist, Protestant, doesn't matter. We're all children of God searching for the truth, you know, and we all have something to say, and he listened. Even to graffiti on the walls. They have something to tell us too. He would listen to them, you know. So it was after Vatican II. There was a sense of excitement at the time, which was really wonderful, you know. And there was a playfulness about it as well. And there was humor and, you know, a great sense. We always ended up, every academic year ended up, like going out to the Bavarian woods or something, to a monastery, which always had a bar, it's beer, where we'd have a get-together and a talk, invite somebody like Pannenberg or Rahner or somebody to talk to us, and then we'd say Mass together, but enjoy as well, you know. So we mixed, you know, serious study with joy and togetherness and friendship.
Was it the case when he was your doctoral professor as well?
Pardon?
Did you speak a lot to him when you were a student in doctorate?
Not too much, because he had about 20 or 30 doctoral students, you know. But I happened to have a car. I was earning my stay by doing some supply work in the rural part of Bavaria, outside of Regensburg, by Nittendorf. And so I had a car. He had no car. So sometimes I would drive him around. So in that way I got to know him perhaps better than most others, you know. And also we'd end up then with a meal with Maria, his sister, in home, and it was just ordinary, you know. So he never had any aura of the great professor or the great cardinal or even the great pope, you know. If I might end up, you know, when we came together as a Schülerkreis in Castel Gandolfo after he was elected, he said once, you know, he feels like a deep-sea diver who is down in the depths, in the murkiness of the church, in a sense, has to come up to the surface to get oxygen. He got oxygen being with his students, listening to discussions, inviting famous people to talk, you know. Oxygen of the truth, friendship, and friendship.
Beautiful. What about you, Father Lombardi?
I would answer to your first question in two ways. If I was surprised or not, what then he...
Considering your first experience with him as a young student.
I was absolutely not surprised by the choice of John Paul II in doing him prefect of the Congregation of the Faith. I think it was one of the very good decisions of John Paul II. He knew him well, and he chose the right person for me to guide the discussion and about the theology and faiths in the church in this difficult time in which we had to find again a more peaceful and constructive way to be together. And this was the right person. And when I speak and think to the pontificate of John Paul II, I think at the same time always to the couple of persons. This is John Paul II and Ratzinger's prefect. This was for me an incredible couple of persons. This is really one of the keys of the pontificate of John Paul II and his merits. This is the first. And the second, as he was elected Pope, normally I don't like to do prevision. I prefer always to wait and to see who will come at the fenster of St. Peter, who will be the Pope, without having done prevision or with the journalists and so on, here and the papabile or not. I don't like absolutely. But at the conclave of Benedict, I was practically sure that he would be elected, and in a short time. Why? Because for me, the level of his culture and balance in seeing the problem of the church and of the discussion about the faith in the culture of today was for me without many other alternatives. And in the way he was able to guide a conversation, as you said about the seminaries and so on, I said the same in the assemblies of the cardinal, in the congregation of the cardinal before the conclave. I was not in the conclave, obviously, but as director of the press office, I had the permission to be present, listen, in the congregation of the cardinals before the conclave. And the way in which he, as dean, has conducted was so sovereign and giving freedom and responsibility and doing a synthesis was sovereign, that I think that it was the moment in which the great majority of the cardinals said, yes, this is a good leader for us in this time. And then in this sense, this was for me not a surprise.
And Father, I would also ask you, that we're speaking because when Pope Benedict died, you wrote right away as a tribute the fact that for his whole life he had been searching for the face of Jesus, and that it was part of, probably the greatest part of who he was. And I thought it was incredibly moving. And you always highlight how important was his work on Jesus of Nazareth. And that's because the dates somehow correspond to the dates of his pontificate. And I think it's something incredibly interesting and insightful.
Yeah, I would be interested in knowing what Monsignor Gens think about this. But I had really, also during the pontificate, the impression that the pontificate was connected with the work and the reflection of Benedict on Jesus, and the work for the trilogy on Jesus of Nazareth. Because from the very beginning of the pontificate, he was working to this, and he decided very much to finish, to arrive at the conclusion of this work. And with patience and constancy that I was really admired. Every week he took the Tuesday and the time to work and write something, and he went on and on and on, one book, 2 books, and then we were waiting to the third. And it was very clear that he decided to finish. And also in the last conversations with Sevald, the book, the interview after the renunciation, Sevald posed a very good question to him: what was for you this work? And he said, for me was taking water from the sources, from the profound sources, every day. And then, in a sense, his spiritual life and his faith and his service was nourished also by this reflection on Jesus Christ. And as he finished, he published the 3rd volume, and I remember very well the presentation, public presentation of the 3rd volume. I had as the spiritual impression that he had finished something that was not only a book, but he had finished an itinerary, a way, an etap of his life. And in this sense, I think there is a certain connection, not a calculated connection, but a spiritual connection among between the book of Jesus and the completion of the book of Jesus and the service of the pontificate. And he has always said, this is not a magisterial book, this is not magisterial. Well, I understand this. But at the same time, I say always, yes, this is a book of that strengthens us in the faith. The service of the Pope is to be the rock for our faith. Then in this sense, his service to help us to believe in Jesus Christ is a typical papal service. And in this sense, even if it was not formally magisterial, it was substantial, a pontifical service, I think. And then in this sense, I see the 2 things very, very strictly connected.
That's fascinating. That brings me to my last questions. We just have a couple of minutes left. Father Twomey, I know that after his passing, after Pope Benedict's passing, you highlighted that you would not be surprised if he became a doctor of the Church. So, in a way, what you've just said with Father Lombardi, give credit to that. So what are your thoughts?
Well, I had the privilege of seeing him 3 months before he died in September 2022, wasn't it? Yeah? And to present my book on the liturgy to him, because it was inspired by his talks he gave in Salzburg, actually, on the sacrament and my time in Papua New Guinea dealing with ritual for the natives of Papua New Guinea. But the book didn't arrive, so I gave him a lecture instead, and he listened attentively, and he couldn't speak very much. He was very, very weak. His voice was very, very weak, and he was coughing, but he was still. And he said at the end of it, "You have grasped my mind fairly clearly, I think." Monsignor Genswein can confirm that. And then I said to him afterwards, "You know, Your Holiness, you sacrificed everything when you became an archbishop." At the time I gave out to him, I said, "How could you leave your academic work and become a bishop?" Sorry for that, but all the bishops concerned. And he said, "Well, when the Pope writes you a personal letter, what can you do?" And he showed me Paul VI letter, I had to do obedient, So you gave up everything. You couldn't do what you set out to do. You read your dogmatics, your summa, What you've left us are fragments. Fragments which we and future generations can build on. We can build these foundations for a new cathedral of the faith. It was good you didn't write your systematic dogmatics, because that creates a system. You left no system. You left fragments like stars in the night, lights that give light in the darkness. And young theologians, they are doing it now, can build on that and create a new, as it were, theology for the future generations.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Father Twomey, Father Lombardi. We will now take a short break, but thank you so much for your testimonies. They are so crucial to keep the memory alive of such a great man of God who somehow also changed the course of the history of the Church. We will be
I'm Father Dwight Longenecker. May the light of Jesus Christ, Son of God and Son of Mary, born at Bethlehem, shine in your hearts and minds this Christmas. And may the blessing of God Almighty, Father, Son,